Welcome, everyone, to our Artist in Residence Gala for 2026. My name is Rachel Brown, and I am the director for the Center for Studies in Religion and Society here at UVic. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get fully started. Melanie, one of our artists for this evening, has put out some books on the table. So after we have finished our program for the evening, if you're interested in purchasing one of the books, you can do so. There are also chapbooks of the poem that Melanie is going to be reading this evening that are for free. If you would like to take one of those, please feel free to do that. Again, there is food and drink and coffee and things of that nature in the side room. I just ask that if you do get up to go and get some more, that's totally fine, but just try to be quiet in the process. That would be great. So the CSRS Artist in Residence program had its beginnings in 2008 when Paul Bramadat, this latecomer, director emeritus of the CSRS, arrived in Victoria to begin his long and fruitful tenure as director. Paul started his first term with the great fortune of having a gifted poet as one of the graduate fellows in the community that year, Melanie Siebert. So Melanie was then working on a collection of nature poetry for her MFA thesis. In addition to adding a professional artist perspective to the daily conversations at the center, Melanie also led a number of workshops on the technical and symbolic ways that poetry works to open doors in our imaginations. And as Paul has told me many times over the years, he was so moved by her artistic and intellectual contributions to our community that he decided there should always be an artist in the room at the CSRS. Yes. Thank you, Paul. And thus he established the Artist in Residence program, which at the time was a title, an invitation into our community, and an office or studio space in the offices at the CSRS. He started the dream, and then about a year later, Dr. Yvonne Sieur, a professor in our French department, created an endowment that would allow us to offer artists a stipend as well, a gift we are grateful for daily. So on behalf of the about 18 artists who have benefited from the fellowship and the hundreds of CSRS scholars whose work have been enriched by their engagement with working artists, I want to thank you, Yvonne, for your generosity over the years. Now, over the 17 years since the program began, painters, poets, novelists, composers, sound artists, photographers, storytellers, Indigenous beaters, weavers, calligraphers, playwrights, puppeteers, yes, puppeteers, and sculptors have added to our understanding of religion, spirituality, and society. And what feels especially wonderful in this storyline is that in my first year as director, the artist that was the inspiration for this entire thing is back with us as one of our artists in residence this year. It feels like a wonderful circle as I close out my first year as director that I too got to experience the poetic voice that began it all. So tonight's program will unfold as follows. First, each of our artists will speak for about 20 minutes. They will introduce us to some of their work, giving readings of their poetry, and sharing some reflections on them. And then I have the privilege of facilitating a conversation between them for about 20 minutes before we open up to a broader Q&A with the audience here tonight, both in person and online. And so now allow me to introduce our two artists in residence, Melanie Siebert and Neil Griffin. So Melanie is the author of 3 books, including the poetry collections Deepwater Vee and Signal Infinities, and the nonfiction book Heads Up, Changing Minds on Mental Health. She spent decades working as a wilderness guide on remote rivers across Alaska, Nunavut, and the Northwest Territories, and Deepwater Vee grew out of that life on the land and water. It was written while she was compiling an MFA at UVic and was an Ian H. Stewart Graduate Fellow here at the CSRS. And it later became a finalist for a Governor General's Literary Award. Her nonfiction book, Heads Up, won the Lane Anderson Award for Best Science Writing for Young Readers in Canada. Signal Infinities, her most recent book, explores pain, embodiment, and our relationship with a rapidly changing, more than human world, and draws on her perspective as a registered social worker and therapist whose clinical practice focuses on trauma and PTSD. Neil Griffin is a writer and naturalist. Raised on the prairies and trained as a wildlife biologist, he abandoned the glitz and glamour of tropical fieldwork for the financial stability of freelance writing. His acclaimed essays on Canadian wilderness have been anthologized in Points of Interest and featured on Great Canadian Longform. Neil is a former finalist for CBC's Poetry Prize and the author of 2 forthcoming books, Bat Planet and Endings, Encounters with Extinction. He holds an MFA from the University of Victoria, where he is an instructor in the writing department, most recently as the Harvey Southam Journalist in Residence. His Artist in Residence project looks at road trips as a form of pilgrimage. Neil is a gifted teacher with a line of students who are often waiting outside his office at the center, where he has often found mentoring young writers in their craft. Now, in the poetry of both of our artists tonight, they express a deep engagement and relationship with nature. In their work, we see reflections on what it means to travel these lands and to consider their inhabitants, both human and non-human. Relationality is central. And any reflection on relationality with the places we live and travel on and the nature we are part of reminds us of the importance of considering the lands on which we are gathered tonight. And so I want to acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen, the Songhees, and Wisepsa Musqueam peoples on whose territory the university stands, and the Lekwungen and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. And now please join me in welcoming Melanie, and then Neil will follow.
Thank you, Rachel. I so appreciate your acknowledgement of these lands. And yeah, I too raise my hands to the Lekwungen lands and the Wasanich lands. And I'm just so grateful for the beauty that's here, especially in spring. Hey, we're so lucky to live here. The little leaves on the tree in our front yard were just bursting out this morning. It was the first time I saw them. So that was really special. It's such a sustaining place to live. I want to just thank everyone at the center and for all of you that are here tonight, and Paul for way in the day when I was first a graduate fellow. That was a very special time in my life. And thank you for everyone who's at the center now, and for Rachel for so warmly welcoming me in. I've attended all the lectures and I've made notes at every single one of them. So I just want to let you know that every one of you, I'm going to drop a little Easter egg into my next book of poetry, and it's going to be some little thing some little idea or concept or snazzy little words that you put out there in your lecture. I'm sure they're all going to make it in. Just being at the center has been such a enriching experience. The conversations and it really is mind-blowing. So yeah, Shubham, that artistically talented woman, I'm sure she'll be in my book somewhere. And I just want to say also, yes, thank you, Yvonne, so much. I'm so grateful for the Zhezheng and Yen Ingshe artistic scholarship for art and spirituality that makes this residency possible. It's amazing. Thank you. I just love having a little office in that little low green building, right? It's almost like it's just like kind of trying to nest into the salal. And when it rains, like yesterday, it was just like you can really hear the rain in that building. So I'm going to start with just a little talk about the genesis of my poem, and then I'll read it for you. So tonight, I'm going to read a poem that has its genesis in the heart of the Northern Rockies at these coordinates. I like to be really specific with the coordinates. Like if you literally dropped into this particular place, you'd be right there. It's in the Muskwa-Kachika. The Muskwa-Kachika is in the northeast corner of BC. It's a vast protected area where there's 50 watersheds. Is there a mouse or something happening that I need to? Are we good? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. The Muskwa-Kachika, an area, 50 watersheds, where tectonic forces have uplifted these ancient seabeds, and where the rivers and the ice and the weather, more than humans, still shape the land. And so my poem is called Folded and Faulted. I swear I'll keep it. a sundog translucence flanking my fear of death. And I'm just going to let some of my slides from my time there just roll while I introduce the poem and talk a little bit about my process. And okay, so we're back at the Muskoka, sitting beside the lake underneath this little willow or whatever it was. And everyone else is going off and riding. And it just kind of opened up an era in my life with dealing with physical pain. And physical pain, for some reason, opened into this older, more long-standing alienation from my body. So I grew up in a Mennonite community, and we were taught we are not of this world. We were supposed to die to the body. Dust would return to dust. The body would be buried. A trumpet would sound, right? And the dead would be raised incorruptible. I can just like hear the little solo in Handel's Messiah, which is like always just like got me. I remember actually biking around my town as a small kid, and absolutely no one was around. And I was just panicking because I was sure everyone else had been raptured and I was left because I was bad, because my body was bad, my desires were bad, my thoughts were bad, but especially the body, especially a girl's body, a woman's body, a queer body. It was something to mistrust and to control and to deny. And in my experience, that alienation from my body was also an alienation from the earth. So the injured version of my body and this trip into the Muskoka and this poem were a way to begin reworking that relationship for me to my body, to the earth. So, okay, let me back up just for a moment because the project that I pitched to the center was just slightly different. Artists, right? I tried to write those poems that I pitched, but they kind of went nowhere. And honestly, part of the problem was that I had this date today in my calendar, and I had an audience, you, in mind. And that just stopped me in my tracks. Like I couldn't get a word down. And for me, that experience just over the last little while has helped me realize a couple things about my poetics, which is there's a couple things that poetry actually asks of me. And I'm not saying this is universal, this is just my experience. But one, I need a sense of horizonless time. Like the clock and the calendar have to actually just drop away. It helps to stare at the clouds, just kind of scrolling by, or like a wave or a branch outside the center actually works just pretty well. But the unfolding can't have a deadline. The poems for me arise from this slow geological inner work. It's just fundamentally slow. The other thing is, too, I need a deep privacy, a secret interiority, the sense that no human being ever needs to hear or know about what is arising within me. The religious community I grew up in prized conformity and suppression of feeling. And to think my own thoughts and to feel my own feelings has been a great unlearning for me. So for me, this is poetry, a secret interiority, a place where there's just freedom to be mortal and animal and to love what I love and to current with feeling and to be unworded and kinetic, taking in the strangeness of shape and color and movement and sound and touch. and to practice a kind of interoception, tuning into embodied sensation and knowing. And sometimes to reach for words, beautiful because they are so provisional and craning and ridiculously inadequate, so insubstantial they could just blow away in the wind. Words with a quality as ephemeral and vulnerable as being itself. So for this reading, I've turned back to this poem from the Musqua Kachika that came to me in these conditions, sitting alone by the lake. And I've worked on editing it over this last while because I care about the fidelity to that experience and to the many beings that were there with me. And I care about getting as close as possible to their alterity. And so editing it became another layer of unfolding and understanding that experience. But I admit, poetry is very weird because it uses language, this tool that's so prized for like naming and organizing and logic and classifying and just really pinning things down. And yet poetry uses language in this way that's more akin to music, that constantly gestures towards the inadequacy of language, its silences, its enigmas, its unbounded wilds. Or at least that's the poetry that pulls me. My partner, Allie, actually reminded me of what one of our teachers said, describing poetry as like shooting arrows. It's like the lines of the poem are these arrows that are just arcing towards this thing. And you shoot arrow after arrow at the thing, and you never quite get it. But the arrows make this shape. All the near misses make this shape. And the shape is like this outline that gives this sense of what you've been after. Well, the mystery and the aliveness remains intact, hopefully. So yeah, there's one last thing I'll say about my poetics, and that is that poetry for me starts with this interior whisper for no one but myself. But then I find myself like murmuring to the mountains, to the waters, to the shorebirds, to the unfurlings, the things that are dying, the muds in the tracks in the mud. And so there is this actual urge to communicate with other beings. Because else, why else write, right? To find some kind of kinship while also like touching into like the silence and the limits of that kinship. And for me, this is as close as I get to prayer. And sometimes I'm ready for humans to listen in. So I'm going to read from Folded and Faulted, I Swear I'll Keep It, a sundog translucence flanking my fear of death. First snow, briefly, on the backs of moving animals in the high alpine. At lake's edge, I'm waiting for the lowered hour when the pain makes sense. The loon's empty dance hall levitates. Several unproven gods appear as blown things, as swiveling ears, as coral masks hung in the mountain's costume shop. The ragged rangers offering a suit that fits so perfectly, it must in back be full of pins. I've been practicing the last look, the last drinking in. The collected waters do not smell like a hospital. The lake is always ready for another glittery thing sinking to the bottom. The river lifts what it can. I grade the slope of my own conditional fluids. The hanging glacier, a hushed lab that invents the tincture to tolerate distance. One day, we will be wed in the finery of reflective particles. Not transcending pain, but opening to it. Or just lying in a declivity, under a reddening bush, unburning bush, rooting in the outwash, at sundown's flourishing edge. So close, so close. I was taught I was not of this earth. I was a body with a mission to renounce the body. I tried to hide my desires from God. Then for a second, the mountain carousels its deep time sea, twinkling down diatoms, radiolarans, forems, coccolithophores, drifts and drifts, becoming the interior sun, oiling the mountain's wing beats. Cloud shadows play the mountain's musical score. A secret love is portable, but not easily given over. Here, the sun is gold threading an anesthetic into grass. It's okay to need this. To sluice the body's slight and perhaps psychosomatic sensations that lift in talon drags, imitating dragonflies, hauling invisible shiny buckets, recklessly, gingerly, that physical transfusion. Seabeds settling for untold this way then that sachets. Then the tectonic crash, driving the buckling. The metamorphic, high temp, crystalline heartstone stays hidden. Osprey hauling up a fish. Athletic spark blown into procession. Bull elk in velvet with a heavy, alluring limp. Mountains dashing move. Dopamine spiking secret loves. Right? Secret love. I curl near to the visible beating heart of the translucent water flea. Lucid swimmer, jumpy as my heart. Who, if exposed to a predator's scent, bears offspring with spiky, armored heads. Diaphanous green pain auroras in my mother. First injuries, indistinguishable from identity. Ticket in the cloud mouths. Now doing the bandaging. Elsewhere, a province advances its wolf kill. A bush pilot, sipping coffee, finds a hole through a thunderstorm. The treaties huff and sway, charge a courtroom. Oil and gas surf cricketably in the permeable rock. The eye here wanting skill, discipline, ceremony. The Catawba River cutting on one side, settling on another. The sweeping turn, swapping it up. deceptively deep and fast, water's needles and green lanterns, the churning glacial shine of rock flour, high, luminous, tarns feeding in. What isn't wasted years? In the direction of beginning anew, burnt trees lift their unparsable symbols. Dear river, dear laminar flow, dear chaotic changes in pressure and velocity, dear unsteady vortices, water sliding on water, turbulence fountaining from rock and swimming animals. What's the ceremony for entering? I'm hanging on to the moment when fear fueled pleasure that tasted everything. Then the animal running my willow-whipped face. My apprenticeship to iffy existence. Hanging on and letting go. Mountains' famous boots, gold striking, even down a hospital corridor.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Melanie. Thanks for starting us off and for dealing with the blue screen with such grace. And just a reminder that what do we need except words? So I'm going to shut this, forget the people on Zoom. We're going to have a secret poetry meeting here that they're not going to get anything to do with. Thank you everyone for coming. Thanks to Scott and Jessica and Molly and the other people who set up the room earlier. I really appreciate that. Thank you to Yvonne for funding this really wonderful position. Thanks to my first year students who came, and also my recently graduated or graduating students who came as well. It's been really wonderful to watch you guys sort of grow as writers. And now, especially the ones who are graduating, you get to see that I don't know what I'm talking about, and I've been feeding you nonsense for the last 4 years. So my project here is called Approaching Prayer, Saskatchewan, Sonnets on the Road. Like Rachel's introduction said, I'm a poet and an essayist. Like Melanie, I pitched a different project for this. I pitched essays and sort of nonfiction, and then I wrote poetry. Maybe we can talk about why and how we sort of come to those decisions. I'm also from the prairies. Originally, I moved here around 10 years ago, and I've tried since moving here to sort of become a BC writer, whatever a BC writer is. Nicholas Bradley's in the back. Maybe he could tell us what a BC writer is. But I can't seem to get rid of the prairies, of thinking about the prairies, of wanting to write about the prairies, of being drawn to poets and writers and thinkers. I think, is it dead? Has it died? Is it back? Hello, there we go. All right. Can't see my notes without looking cross-eyed, but that's all right. Poetry is not about glamour. To me, I think Southern Alberta, the prairies, this is really road trip country. So the project that I wanted to pitch was about road trips. Some of my earliest memories are road trips on the prairies. You got to drive a long way, often to get anywhere, whether you're going camping or skiing or hiking, or you just want to go see a concert. And those people in Edmonton have built the bigger stadium, and the bands won't come to Calgary anymore. So you got to drive up to Edmonton to see them. Possibly road trips are a big part of the Canadian experience everywhere, but I really think of them as a part of the lexicon of the prairies, the space, the distance, the time. And I think that seems to have had an effect on poets who come from the prairies. I know lots of people here are a big fan of Tim Lilburn, of Jan Zwicky, Sherry Benning, Patrick Arrington, Fred Waugh, Billy Ray Belcourt. These are poets who I think of as there is often a space and a time and a thought in their poetry. They are interested in poetry as a place of thinking, not just of feeling, of thinking and of singing, as one of a book that some of them wrote together said. And I wanted to try and think with them, to engage with their work through my own work and through sort of the prairies as a place to write about. But because, this is the university, I was like, well, maybe I'll find like a framework. People love frameworks, a framework to base my poems in. Scott did warn me that would happen. There we go. So like any dilettante, I was like, oh, Victor Turner. Some of you told me about him, and then I read about him. I was like, great, super, awesome. So Victor Turner is a cultural anthropologist that many of you are probably familiar with because you told me about him. And I became interested in his sort of structure of ritual and thought about how it applied to road trips and how it applies to pilgrimages and possibly how it applies to poetry as well. Turner's framework has a couple of ideas. There are a lot of pictures on Google Images of Turner's framework, and none of them are very good, but this one's got little people on it, so that's fun. You start in this act of separation. It's the act of leaving. It's cutting ties with your family, your friends, lovers, community, removing yourself from your political and material context, removing yourself from your responsibilities, from the things that I think that make us human, from the soil of our existence. You deliberately uproot yourself. In road trips, we probably call this packing. When I was younger, especially before I had a baby who's out there screaming somewhere, an important sort of ritual act for me when I went on road trips was that I would turn my cell phone off and I would shove it into the deepest, sort of darkest recesses of my bag, of the car, and I would leave it off until I was done. It was for me this symbolic, I'm going on a journey now, and the responsibilities of home are temporarily no longer my responsibilities. Don't do that anymore. Now I try to be like, well, what if I wait like 3 hours before checking in? That's kind of a separation. This in road trip literature is sort of often seen as this like act of great freedom, which I find very strange. The act of like cutting yourself off from all the ties that make you a person is seen as an act of freedom. It's sort of this 1960s Kerouac era romantic idea that I find quite sad almost. It's lonely, I think, to think of freedom as an act of separation from community. But it's not all lonely. The second sort of stage of Turner's idea is this liminality. I have a horror of this word, the word liminal. It's one of those terms that I think escaped academic confinement a couple of years ago and then sort of drifted onto the internet. And then my students started writing poems and short stories where they used the word liminal and just to mean kind of weird. And they would say like a bathroom is a liminal space, which maybe, I don't know, you enter, you undergo a ritual, you come out. Is it I don't know. But I think it is still a sort of a useful idea. It's the state of ambiguous identity. If you have cut all the ties from where you are from, then where are you now? How do you exist? It's a period of great intensity where everything is focused, everything is honed, your attention is in the present, in the now. And I think this is a good description of road trips. You are present, you are in the now, you are curious about the miles that your car is devouring. You are thinking about, well, maybe at most, where are we going to stay tonight? But mostly you are drawn to the immediate now and now and now and now. It's an unsustainable intensity. You can't go on a road trip forever, probably, although there is a couple who have been just like driving around the world for the last 40 years in a van. They have a website that is crazy. It's very 1992 GeoCities, and they have not changed at all. So maybe you can't go on a road trip forever. I don't think you can, though. The interesting part of liminality, of this betweenness that Turner suggests, is there's also within that this sort of state of communitas, where you create a new community, a spontaneous community of people who are traveling together. You have all dissolved your social ties, and so when you come into place together, you create new social ties that are sort of spontaneously arisen. So here's Blake's engraving of the Canterbury Tales, sort of one of the classic sort of pilgrimage road trip narratives. A bunch of people going on the road, telling each other stories, and their social ties have been leveled. All of a sudden, the knight is chatting to a brewer. I can't remember all of them. I'm not an English student. But there's a flattening of social roles and a recreation of a new kind of order. I think a campground has this similar sort of element. Maybe not now because everyone is in their like really, really, really expensive RVs on their phones, and it's basically just like being at home. But I remember when I was a kid, at least, we would go to a campground, and the communities and the rules and the structures of existence that kids create in a campground over the 3 or 4 days that you're staying there is, I think, an element of this communitas. Where you come from is kind of irrelevant. Whole worlds, whole lives are lived in this very, very intense temporary space. And then Turner says, you go home. You have to go home. A road trip has to end. A pilgrimage has to end. You can't stay in this in-between space forever. You go home. You come back into community with these original ties that you have. Maybe you're changed. Maybe you're not. So I read Turner, and I thought Turner was interesting. But what I found really interesting was not sort of the other academic discourse that followed from Turner, sorry, academics, but was instead the poets that Turner had influenced, poets who read Turner and were interested in this ritual framework. And I was interested in them and what they were thinking. These are poets like A.A. Amons and James Wright and Denise Levertov, and particularly James Dickey, who I borrowed the title from. He has a poem called Approaching Prayer, which works through these sort of three structures or these three stages of ritual. So what I thought was, I want to try and write a sequence of poems that operates mostly in this state of in-betweenness. I didn't want to write narrative poems. I didn't want to write a poem that told a story. I didn't want to write a road trip narrative that is sort of this epic in miniature, this sort of picaresque journey. I wanted to write poems that didn't offer an easy beginning, an easy ending, that didn't offer sort of natural. They wanted them to be in between. I wanted them to be intense and equal to one another, and deliberately separate from conventional meanings of sense, from narrative, from what else have I written here? From the normal sort of soil of my own writing, which is often I'm trying to communicate something. So I was like, okay, great, I'm going to write some poems. Sorry about the thing that I pitched. And I ended up settling on the sonnet as a form because I really like sonnets. And I think that they express an interesting tension between sort of freedom and submission, which I think is what road trips and pilgrimages are also about. You have an illusion of freedom in a road trip, but you're still tied to the road. You're still tied to the sense that one day this is going to end. Pilgrimages, I think, are sometimes thought of as acts you are sort of submitting to an itinerary, to a process, to a spiritual destination. But if you're a 14th century pilgrim and for your whole life you've had to give confession to your parish priest who knows you and everything about you, great, for the first time you're going on the road, you can give confession to everybody else. And also in the evenings, there's all these interesting new people around. It's very, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So I think there's a kind of freedom in pilgrimage that we don't always think about. So I was thinking about this tension, and for me, the sonnet is a form that has this tension in it. There are rules to a sonnet, rules, mostly that they're 14 lines, and that can be constricting, but there's also a tremendous freedom in that form to try and express yourself. So I went through sort of my memories and my notebooks and my old photo albums of road trips that I had taken mostly through this region over the last 20 years or so. And I set my poems here, but the setting is not really real. They're not poems that are sort of seeking a verisimilitude, of reality. They're interested in kind of a slightly enchanted, I guess, psychogeography. And then I wrote a bunch of poems that are set in these sort of various locations. And I'm going to read one or two of them, but since we're all on this journey together, you're going to read some poems as well. We have microphones that will be distributed to our brave volunteers. I know there's a bunch of poets in the room, so you're going to have to read, I guess. I'm going to set us off. I'm going to read the poem of separation, the poem that sort of launches us. And then what I'd like is for people to pick a destination that you'd like. The poem will come up on the screen, and I'd like us to make this a communal reading rather than just me up here yapping for the next 8 to 10 minutes. And I have been teaching for a while, so I am happy to stand here in silence while nobody volunteers. That's fine. I'll do that. So I'm going to read one poem here to start us off. I drove from here to Val-Marie, 19 hours, and when I arrived, I didn't want to get out of the car. Holy cell, bubble of light coursing mountain paths, bounding through tunnels, over tarns, mocker of wagon trail, footpath, and rail, steel-bodied confessional tuned towards silence. I had to pee. A pull-out, dead field, April killed, theatered in willow light, balconies ripe with magpies, gossip, the latest fashion, who's fucking who and why, no eyes for the main show, the long, slow drop into earth, hot pavement, steaming soil, a lottery ticket bought and cast into the wind, grand prize, the self, broken at last into equal measures. All right, brave volunteers. Paige, wonderful. Do you have a location you'd like to visit?
Do I need to be able to see the poem from here?
You can walk up a little closer.
Okay, I will. Regina.
There is no poem on Regina, but there is a moose jaw.
Saskatoon?
You can have a Saskatoon.
All right. Saskatoon is the Venice of the plains, city of bridges, absurd on the face. Two plaid-shirted brave tossed empties into the river. I could be buried on an island of Budweiser cans, floating in the middle of South Saskatchewan, paraded down Broadway in an open coffin lined with Rough Rider jerseys, weeping, wailing, and gnashing of dentures. In Riversdale, statuettes of muskrats act as informants. Miracles take us through the accident of living. I think I would like renunciation of wounds, vanity and sunlight highways, cast my ring into the river. We're married now, if you'll have me.
Thank you, Paige. That's not legally binding, just so you know. Great. Yes, next to Paige.
I also have to go to the front. There are all these places. Which what? Oh, there are all these places. Edmonton, maybe.
And there's none in Edmonton. They're where the dots are.
Ah, where the dots are. Okay.
Didn't write enough. I'm disappointed,
Airdrie.
everyone. Airdrie. This one's a Calgary one, but it's close enough.
Okay. I kill the gas and snakebite the steering wheel. Steering wheel. Homecoming is hazardous pilgrimage. 6 steps up the 6 steps I ran down 20 years ago without looking back. Kindergarten shrubs flown to tree, intercepting front lawn light. Better to visit only in memory. tit up stomping grounds from the shadowy vantage of dreams. But why listen to Proust? Recumbent, neurotic, in a narrow bed, fretting dust and pollen pool in honeycombed walls of dead cells. A tomb, a room, preserved with pretty green rug and blue lampshades. A little danger seems the better part of the bargain. Is it the bargain?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just a typo.
Okay. Cars, cats litter the suburban street. No, cats line the suburban street. Is it cars? Okay. Yeah.
Honestly, cats is more interesting.
Yeah.
It's a good edit.
Well, maybe I could be a co-author.
I'll credit you.
Windows jibe in the sun. At the top of the stairs, a whole blue sky is waiting.
Thank you. All right, who's next? The green dot, a green dot. John, and then, oh, yeah, in the back there, sorry, and then John. We could do competitive readings of the same poem.
I'll take the green dot that's between the border of Alberta and Saskatchewan.
This one?
Yeah.
This one?
The lake is off limits, bubbling over with cyanobacteria, miracle of evolution, the first form on Earth to photosynthesize, in a way both our father and our mother, the parents of all. Unfortunately, like mom and dad, they emit neurotoxins that'll make us sick and kill the dog. 45 degrees and the AC is dead. Wind cuts out when you need it most, via negativa. We are imagining the ways we will be different in the world, climbing to the hilltop, entering the mystery cult. In Cypress Hills, everything is ungenerated, whole and uniform. Still, perfect refuge, except for the bacteria. The perpetual choir has been silenced. I know no longer what I am or any one thing is. This afternoon cannot compose itself.
Thank you. Moose jaw it is. The most anyone has wanted to pay for moose jaw.
People on Zoom. I'm going to do that joke again. I'll take moose jaw for 1,000, please, Neil. I should have known she was trouble. $5 for a box of pulp novels at Moose Jaw garage sale. And now the backseat leather is all hard-boiled. Marlowe, Archer, and Chester Himes. Midway through the journey of my life, and it's been more picaresque than expected. A man bursts in with a gun and pistol whips you. Events compound. More head trauma than is generally recommended by medical professionals. A man bursts in. Language is always self-conscious. In the rear view, my mouth wilts like old lettuce. Verbs resist. Nouns protest. The deliberate effort to meet experience face to face is a failure. A man bursts in.
Thanks, John. Come on, cowards. Thanks, Paul.
Hey, yep. Is this on? I guess Winnipeg's not an option, eh?
Winnipeg is not an option.
Could I have something from the grasslands prairies? The man making oatmeal on a hot pot tells me his wife is dying, is dead, has died. When she was dying, he says he decided that after she died, he would take up watercolors, spend his weekends driving the back roads of Saskatchewan, painting ditch flowers and lone trees and snow-thick vales dusted in the pink light of a living body. She's dead, he says, so he's not doing it, or he's doing it. He stirs his oatmeal with a big green-smeared index finger, which must be extremely hot. And I wonder where the green comes in. It's early spring, the season still of winter kill and melting cow shit. Green is some kind of prayer living in the mountains. Green is the last breath in the bulrushes of a dying woman's chest. Green, he says, is his wife's favorite color. Is. Like all sudden shifts, tenses are difficult to manage.
Thank you. Let's do a couple more.
Which ones haven't been done yet? Yeah, something in Alberta, maybe.
This one?
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
April green, trimmed tight. Hills splayed and pegged to dry. Below, 3 horses twist blackly in the greater shadow of themselves. Oh. Light crumbles. There are places that hold silence like a skin diver. Against the vastness of space and all, they invite compression. Pressure, a harrowing to the hard, quick, and nub of a voice. Quiet and more quiet. Veiled morning courses the ridge like the line of a shoulder. Perfect landscape. Inked to a hill figures. There are places where silence runs like water. I dip my tongue in silence. I hinge my mouth to stillness. I lick the narrow teeth.
Thanks, Lisa. Lisa's doing an MFA at UBC starting next year. She's a hotshot, but it's in screenwriting, which is a fake genre. Let's do one more, and then I'll read this sort of poem of return. Erica?
I choose swift current. Why on earth would they land in such a place? Wah asks, on the flat streets of swift current. White sunlight on a field of stakes. Why live? The question echoed at the Nightjar Diner, here where I pay $40 for 2 BLTs that we eat in Memorial Park's fragile shade. Objects erupt from potential, only to fail, bent back on themselves like a dying bird. You've had enough of small towns and their secrets, unpleasant memories kicked up between your shoulders. 18 pebbles lined up in a row. While driving, the shadows still seemed ample, but now we see only life divided up into little burnings, kicked one by one into the past's dry river. But the dog is having a great time chasing ants through the dry grass. We're not dumb enough to envy her.
Thank you. I reckon every reckoning is the final one, but it ain't. Can't get prairie dirt out from under my nails. No matter how often I wash behind my ears, I still pull out a burr. Porcupine awns wrap round my toes. A cough up fescue. There are buffalo tattooed on the inside of my eyelids. Don't know how they got there. Probably some drunk escapade. Inside every adult is the child, and inside every child is the infant, and inside every infant is a grass seed and the impulse to say, well, it's not that cold, even if it is. Probably I should give it up. Exorcism seems to work as well for me as it does for Catholics. Very little, or not at all. Red-winged blackbirds don't bolt for freedom. They trill on their rushes, salient to the circumstances. I'm not going to try any longer to give the wind away. Thank you.
supposed to be on. Oh, there we go. Just takes a second. Yeah, thank you both. That was incredible. I'm cognizant of the time and I get to chat with these folks all the time. So I'm going to ask a question to kick you off into conversation with the two of you. And then I think we'll switch to broader Q&A kind of sooner than later, if that's okay with everyone. Yeah, red button, we're good? Red button, red pill, is it the Matrix? All right. It should work. Give it a second. There it is.
There we
Give it
go.
a second.
Check.
There we go. There we go. Okay. So, I mean, I had questions that I was thinking of before, and now when I was hearing the two of you speak, I kind of went to a bit of a different place for the question I think I'll choose. So it seems to me that both of your poems are born out of, or sets of poems are born out of sort of this experience of separating yourself out into nature specifically, or into the rural, or the out of the urban potentially. And I'm wondering why you think that is, or what it is about that separating, that going out of the urban that allows for this kind of creation. Or does it not matter at all?
It matters. Do you want to start? Or
You can go first.
oh, okay. Well, it matters deeply to me, actually, because that's kind of where, like, going out, whatever out actually is, has always been for me like an enlivening thing, partly because of like a couple things. One, just getting into kind of the liminal space, like you were saying, where your kind of ordinary social roles drop away, your email drops away, you can just like turn your phone off. Like, I love, for me, okay, when I go on a trip, I like to get beyond the redneck zone. So like for me, that's the, sorry, that's maybe, but it's like it's the zone beyond where the beer cans and the shotgun shells drop off, right? And then the cell service drops off. And then, you know what else? There's no mirrors. So there's this unself-consciousness that kind of happens. There's this being with other beings that are other than human, actually, kind of, which is maybe the crux of it, and expensiveness, where you just get to then in that liminal zone revisit like actually who you are and what you're made of.
I think I like the sense of being small in a space that is bigger than me, which is like the places, environments that I'm drawn to are grasslands or deserts or places that are sometimes considered wasteland or flyover land, places that have a kind of hugeness that is, I think, difficult to grasp. And I like that sense of feeling sort of small in a place. But I also wonder, for me at least, like I find it quite not easy, but easier to write about places that are unpeopled than I do about peopled places. Like I have tried to write sort of city poems like Frank O'Hara, like to be a poet of a city, and it feels unnatural to me. It feels strange. It feels false. And sometimes I wonder, I'm like, okay, am I reverting, or do I write about the things that I write about because I am afraid of trying to figure out why I can't write urban poems. I can't write city poems. I don't. Someone once said of one of my books, like, it's shocking how few like people there are in this book. And it sort of stuck with me because I was like, well, it's because I'm not comfortable always writing about other people, but I also think I don't know how to do it. So I think writing about like unpeopled places for me is a way I do it, because I feel safe there. It feels manageable in a way that sometimes writing about a city feels false.
Yeah, thanks. Do you have questions for one another before we?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Okay. I'm so curious. Well, first of all, maybe you could just talk a little bit more about the sonnet form and like what drew you to that and why that felt like a good form for this project.
Sure. Yeah. I had originally I was like, I'm going to write prose, I'm going to write nonfiction, I'm going to write a memoir, an essay, and it's going to be brilliant. And it's going to be marketable, which poetry is not. And then it didn't come together. I couldn't figure out a way to make it make sense. I couldn't find like a shape or a structure for it. And poetry, I find more useful for like uncovering something through the process of writing. It feels more like sort of sculpting, maybe, where I'm like, great, I've got all the words, and now I can carve them away and find a shape. But I still, and then I was going to write like a long poem, a polyphonic, multi-voiced long poem, similar to Alice Oswald's Dart, is what I was thinking. Oswald is an English poet who wrote a book-length poem called Dart, which is about the River Dart in England, and she uses a whole bunch of different voices along the river to tell sort of the story of this river. And I thought, well, maybe I could try that with like a highway or with like a road trip. But it felt strange as I started doing that to be a settler and writing this, trying to voice all of these things. I was like, there's things I can voice, but there's things, people, experiences, ideas that feel integral to the landscape, but that I didn't feel comfortable trying to write the voices of. So it seemed like that would be a really great collaborative project that I didn't have time to do. And then the sonnet, it's Old Faithful. It's trusty, it's reliable, it's there. There's 14 lines. I sometimes some of these are like 10. I call them sonnet forms instead. But I find the sonnet to be, I feel like you're immediately in a tradition, which is fun for me to write, to engage in a tradition, to say that, to throw my sonnets up there and be like, what's up, John Donne? Here's what I'm doing now. You've been dead for 400 years, but I have some things to say to you. And I think that's really fun to sort of engage in that poetic tradition, but also that it is this sort of, there's a tension that you have to kind of submit to the form. You can't make a sonnet go necessarily where you want it to go because there are restrictions of length, and you choose those restrictions yourself, but then you have to sort of submit to them. And that for me is exciting, is interesting. It leads poems to go in places that I don't know that they would go if I was writing in sort of unpatterned or free verse.
But you're also eschewing a lot of the conventions of the sonnet. So talk about that, like, what's up?
Look, rhyme is over. No, I'm just not a good enough poet to rhyme is not in my skill. End rhymes, at least. There are some sort of like internal rhymes and stuff in these. But I think I sort of am picking and choosing the conventions that I wanted, a form that felt contained, but that I didn't want to say, okay, I'm going to write 14 Petrarchan sonnets. I think it would be an interesting exercise to write like one Petrarchan sonnet, but I felt like I wanted to engage with the tradition, but still sort of claim the right of modernizing, which means picking and choosing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of like you have this little cell, which is kind of like the car that you talked about in your first poem. But then, like, I was curious, you've got the map and you got these points all over the map. And so the road trip is linear, but the poems are not. Talk to me about that.
I think I have been trying to escape linearity in writing, which is, I think, impossible because of the nature of the way that we read one word after another, an idea comes one after another. But I think I find it frustrating as like, I don't know, a limitation or a function probably of language, that within each poem it has to be linear, but I wanted to try and say, well, can I not determine, the narrative order of something? We put sort of more weight on maybe the first thing, more weight on the last thing. And sometimes, you put your weak argument in the middle and hope everybody forgets it. And so I wanted it to be, the versions of it that I have like sent out to people, I have change the middle order of the poems. You guys got the same, but other people got different central ordering of the middle poems because I wanted to see, could I sort of find some way to kind of escape a little bit that linear experience of the poems.
That's great. Did you have any questions for Mel before we open up to the broader audience?
Yeah, I got a whole bunch here.
Let's hone in on like one or two.
But I'll start with one. So I'm curious. I read Deepwater Vee this morning, your first collection, and I was curious about some of the same sort of concerns feel like they sort of erupt in your poems. The sort of thinking about geography, thinking about history that is human, but also sort of deep time. But the poems in Deepwater Vee, there are these like cataracts of language. They're like flush and almost violent sometimes in experience, in the desire for experience. They feel like a poet sort of perched on the edge of being swamped. And they're really beautiful. I can see the Tim Lilburn influence in them. Folded and Faulted, by comparison, seems to embrace sort of stillness and space a little more. There's a greater sort of more expansive, maybe geography in the poems. And I wonder if you could talk about, I guess, how your sort of relationship to language or movement or sort of the geography of space in a poem has changed for you as a poet.
That's a very interesting question. I mean, on the most obvious level, I guess, when I was writing Deepwater Vee, that was my book that was coming out of my years of guiding on rivers across the north. And so there just is that feel of like you're on the river, you're pushing, you're going downstream. It's like finding a way, tricky lines. And then the Muskoka was, I mean, that was kind of the accident that I had was the end of my guiding career because I physically could not guide anymore. So in a way, maybe that affects the poems. I mean, maybe that I haven't thought of that consciously, but maybe that comes into the poems. Like literally when I was writing the Muskoka poems, I'm like just a being at the edge of the lake, not moving. And yeah, I imagine that does affect the sort of the sense of the language and the rhythms and yeah. Interesting.
I have so many questions. I thought we'd just sit up here and talk about poetry and alienate everybody. I think one of the questions that I have is, I think as maybe Carmine Starnino, the current editor of The Walrus, said once that one of the characteristics of Canadian poetry is this attraction to the long poem. And
yeah, what is with that?
What is with that? That's what I'm about to ask you. Because you wrote a long poem here. The title poem of Deepwater Vee is a long poem.
Long poems, as apparently you are too.
We all are. It's the Canadian condition. But I wondered what about them attracts you, do you think?
Oh, what attracts me? I thought you were going to ask me who I blame.
Or who you blame. Sometimes these are the same questions. Sometimes attraction and blame are deeply intertwined.
Robert Croach, Seed Catalog.
Yes, I also blame him. Yeah.
That was a book for me that I read and I was like, oh, you can do this? Like the spaciousness in it, the capacity for just like taking in this, taking in a little bit of this, like that's fun, I think. And I mean, I think Tim Lilburn is not without blame. And I'm sure there's others, probably Phil Hall right here, I would say, has some responsibility in the long sequence. Yeah, I mean, I would literally be interested to ask Phil Hall, like, how did we become obsessed with this? I feel like, I mean, I love it as a form. I love the long sequence as a form because of because of its spaciousness and its capacity like to journey a long ways. And then also I have a more like a little bit cynical view, which that it's somehow connected to grant writing and to putting in proposals for artist residencies. You know, so that you frame up a project before you've actually written it, and then you like do this thing that is sort of cohesive in order to fulfill the requirements of the project. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that's accurate. I mean, I think I was like, yeah, nobody gives you an artist residency if you're just like, I'm gonna write a bunch of poems. And they're maybe going to be related to one another, or maybe they're not. But yeah, I think that's probably accurate. But I mean, I like it's that capaciousness, it's that space, that sort of, it's like a poem is like an amoeba that you can sort of like grab and assimilate a whole bunch of different things. It was Seed Catalog that did it for me too. Yeah, yeah.
Hey, oh my God, Robert.
All right, so we're going to open it up for broader Q&A. We will continue the conversation on Friday, obviously, or tomorrow.
Yeah.
So we can keep on keeping on that. But I would like to open it up to the folks in the room. If there's any questions, yeah, Paul at the back.
Now you're just Paul at the back.
Yeah.
That's my future. Paul at the back. That's my present as well. Thank you very much, Mel, for inspiring this whole undertaking. But also, I wonder if you could. I really appreciated your earlier remarks about how the injury you sustained gave you an opportunity to experience a different sense of injury and disembodiment. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about how poetry allowed you to return to your body, how it allowed you to put yourself back together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think poetry can go so many different ways, right? And like, oftentimes when I'm writing, I can actually be very disembodied and very dissociated from my body. And in fact, yeah, I see some nods. It's like probably you guys who are writing, like you can just like literally sometimes sit there and you're writing and writing and writing and you're like in your head and like you forget about your body. And then all of a sudden you go to get up and you're just like, oh my God, I can hardly move. Like I'm in pain, like there's numbness, like what? So writing itself can be very disembodying, I think. But if you set some sort of intention of communicating an embodied experience in the world, then I think that can open up some kind of space of attention to the body. And that interoception can be interesting because when you're really dissociated and really disconnected from the body, you tend to like that does kind of tend to focus, like your prefrontal cortex kind of focuses into like threats, and a more sort of regulated relationship with the body, a more gentle relationship with the body might open oneself up to a more expansive view of the surround. That's a hunch I have anyway.
Thank you. Other questions? Yeah, Erica.
Thank you so much. I love both of your poems so much.
Hmm.
So wonderful. And I have a process question. To what extent do you both think about the audience or the reader when you're writing and feel in some ways accountable to that relationship in the way that your poems are understood? Have you ever witnessed your poems being misunderstood or misread? And I'm curious if that impacts the process, if you get in your head about that or anything.
Great question. Why don't you start? Because I'm curious about you, what you think of audience.
Sure. I think with poetry, I often don't think that much about audience. When I'm writing nonfiction, I do because I'm deliberately trying usually to communicate something that is sort of lucid and coherent, and I'm trying to make my prose, my writing to be like a mirror, or not a mirror, a window that you can sort of see through. But with poetry, I am a little bit more like, well, here's kind of a stained glass window, and I'm on one side of it, and you're on the other side, and it looks nice, and maybe I'm doing a shadow puppet show, and you get the gist of something. Hopefully, it moves you. But I think I'm less concerned with how with who the audience is, a sort of trust that the poems will find an audience. And the only person who usually misinterprets my poem, sorry, she's on Zoom, is my mom. Who usually reads my poems and is like, are you doing okay? Are you all right?
That's so relatable to me because my parents are like that too. They're like, so like, what did you mean when you said this? Yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of what I was talking about, just in terms of, for me, that's the link to the spiritual for me, in that poetry is this incredibly internal space that I try to cultivate, and is for me and my beingness, I guess. But then I'm here. And so I do have this instinctual need to communicate and to share and I mean, there's something in the history of poetry that it is about like breathing it, right? It's about like sounding it. It's like a sound, which is touch, right? Because the sound actually touches your ears, and it can be a community creating kind of thing. And so that's really special too. And so in light of that, I almost think of it as stages. For me, the initial stage is so personal and so me, and I just have to like block everything else out. Otherwise, I don't have a hope in hell. And then at some point, I do get to that process of like, do you get this? And like, I have some really amazing readers, and then we'll go over like just the tiniest little word choices and go back and forth and just like how can we like just get this just so that it lives, but it also lives on this like other level. Yeah.
Well, maybe time for one more question. Yeah, right in the front. You're getting a mic.
Okay, yeah. So I heard something that sounded similar in both of yours, and that was the sense of returning to previous work in some way and entering it. So Melanie, I know that you wrote the beginnings of this 10 years ago on an artist residency, which is really interesting. And then you've come back now 10 years later and have entered into this very different, as a different person, into this space, and have had to move with this again. And then I think I heard that you said you also entered back into kind of a previous time to kind of, but you're entering with who you are now and what you're writing now. And I'm interested in how that affected both of your work, what that was like for you.
Do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, some of this stuff was drawn from sort of old like travel notebooks and journals and stuff that was done when I was sort of just beginning to write poetry. And that stuff, it wasn't written as poetry, but that was around the time when I was first starting to write poems, and the models of how I wanted to write poetry then were quite different from what I've tried to do here going back. I got into poetry. I think I tell all my students when they're like, I hate poetry, It's terrible. It's awful. I tell them you just have to find, you don't have to like poetry. You just have to find a poet. You will find a poet. You will find the poet who opens sort of the doors of poetry for you. And for me, that was Seamus Heaney, who opens the doors of poetry for a lot of people. And I found Heaney's sort of autobiographical poems that were sort of like superficially almost simple in their construction, but the more you dig at them, the more sort of elegantly they're crafted with a sense of sort of language and attention to sound, but not in a flashy way. And their coherence I found to be like a really interesting and beautiful model for poetry. And so for years I was trying to write poems that were like him, but mine were bad. And when I came to this project and was starting to sort of revisit those old notes and old ideas, I wanted to try and do something that was different. I wanted these poems to have sort of seams and fracture and to be sort of self-conscious in their use of language. And I started thinking of them as like, I think kintsugi is called, the Japanese form of like repairing broken porcelain with like lacquer, where you can still see sort of the fracture lines, you can see where it's fallen apart and put back together. And I wanted to try and do that with poems, which was something very different than how I normally write or how I used to write or how this sort of a first material that has become this was written.
Yeah, that's really interesting. For me, I think I'm just a slow being, like Don Domansky has this poem. It's called Birthday. It's an amazing poem. And I read it on my birthday every year and read it on any birthday of anyone that I care about. But the poem says something about like, when I was born, my feet selected the speed of newts. I think that's what happened to me. So thank God for artist residencies, right? That allow us to slow down. And then like this piece that I started way back when, I've just been able to keep working on it and evolve it. And poetry and any kind of art practice, I think, gives you that sort of space. It connects to what John, remind me of John, the CSRS guy who was across the hall from me. Yes, say his last name. Yeah, I don't know his last name. So Tachamenal. His talk, which he talked about eros and ascesis. And like, to me, that like, yes, as a poet or an artist, you need to find these things that either like gin up the eros or like the ascesis that like slenders the self and allows you some way in. And that sort of transformative process can produce art that's really interesting, I think. And sometimes it takes a long time.
Thank you. All right. Well, please join me in thanking our artists for this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I will just draw your attention. Oh, there was the slide that was up there was for our Artists in Residence competition for this year, which is open right now. So if you want to apply to be one of our Artists in Residence for next year, please check that out. And then also please pay attention to our website. We do have a summer, this is the end of our regular sort of academic year of programming, but we do have a summer lecture series starting in just a few weeks. We take a few weeks off from this fun and get started again April 22nd. So please check out our website for those details. And thank you all for coming tonight and for bearing with us through the technology. So thank you.